Hey, I want to thank you personally for joining in on our channel. Um, if you're a subscriber, that's awesome. Continue to come back. We've got great material and content for you that will help you grow in your walk in life in Christ. If you're not, I'd like to challenge you to hit the subscribe button and check the notifications so that weekly you'll get notified of our sermons and other teachings that we will have on here. I hope that you will continue to follow us. And if you're not in our area, please continue to attend the church that you regularly attend and support your local church. If you're in our area in Columbus, Kansas, we would love to have you. We have hours of service on Sundays at 8:15 is our contemporary service, and 10:40 is our service for traditional style. If you want Sunday school, we have Sunday school at 9:30. Come and fellowship with us. See what God can do in your life. When I was 18 years old, I went on my very first, well, really only missions trip I've ever been on, outside of the States. When I was in Master's Commission, I did a couple of inner city kind of mission trips throughout the country. But this was my first time going to Mexico. This was my first time ever like being away from my parents, being away from home, being away from the people that I knew. And it was kind of hard for me. I remember leaving the border in Texas and going south as we were getting into Mexico. I remember we drove a few miles south and I began to question why I was even there. See, I was seeing piles of garbage on the side of the road. And I know that's not necessarily unusual, but you don't see this kind of just large lumps of trash all over the road and just barren desert land. And it just was odd to me, even in small towns. And so as we got into Saltillo, the city that we were ministering and missionarying in, we got there and the whole plan was to just preach. We weren't there to do anything other than that. We weren't there to build houses or work on churches or any of that other stuff. I've done that with Master's Commission. We went and cleaned churches and helped fix things for people and ran services for them. But this was different. I wasn't in Master's yet. This was just me at 18 in a whole new world, someplace different. And I remember going to some of the people's homes here in this town, in this city, and just having this thought of like unbelievability because their houses were like built out of, it was like pueblos. They were clay. They had roofs and walls that were plaster and clay, but they didn't have any flooring. I mean, the floors weren't even carpeted or wood, tile, or even cement. It was a dirt floor. But these people opened their homes and welcomed us anyways. It was different. And it was hard for me to see this. And so I began to sympathize with them, that somehow they were less than me. I didn't empathize, I sympathized. See, I thought that I had it good. And I knew that I was from a poor town, from a poor family. At least I wasn't like this. My struggle, it came from an incomplete understanding of God's view of others. And I didn't have a biblical understanding of love or service or outreach. Now, you're probably sitting there and you're listening to me and you're thinking, that's great, bro. That's not me. I haven't been on a missions trip. And that's okay. You don't have to think the way that I was thinking. You're probably thinking the people, though, that you see around you all the time, because we're in a small town in Kansas, in a rural area, are the same people you've known since you could remember knowing them. In our local community, though, there are homosexuals. And there are some individuals who are desiring to transition from one gender to another. You might know some of them. Matter of fact, some of them might be your own children. You might even act nice to some of these people that you see. But then once they're not around you, you begin to wonder what's wrong with them. But not in a sinful life nature that they are living in, but more in a nature of sinfulness of yourself, thinking that you are mightier or better than they are. On the other end, you might be somebody that knows that we have several people who are MAGA enthusiasts or alt-right leaning Trump supporters. And we have a few of those in our town, quite a bit. And you might not agree with them. You might see them and you might think that they're terrible people because of the way that you know that they think about the homosexuals and the transgenders in our community. But let me ask you, what happens when one of these groups walk into our church and want to join us for worship? What happens when the homosexual sits down next to you and you don't agree at all with their lifestyle? Or what happens when the Trump supporting, Biden hating rallyist sits down next to you wearing all their get up supporting Trump and you don't agree with that at all? Do you welcome them and mean it when you welcome them? Or do you politely ask them to never come back to this church again because you're afraid of what they might do to your community? Well, let's just see how Jesus handles this very same issue. In Matthew 15:21 through 28, in the Christian Standard Bible, we read this. When Jesus left there, he withdrew to the area of Tyre and Sidon. Just then, a Canaanite woman from that region came and kept crying out, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely tormented by a demon." Jesus did not say a word to her. His disciples approached him and urged him, "Send her away because she's crying out after us." He replied, "I was sent only to the house of the lost sheep of Israel." But she came, knelt before him, and said, "Lord, help me." He answered, "It isn't right to take the children's crumbs and throw it to the dogs." "Yes, Lord," she said, "yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus replied to her, "Woman, your faith is great. Let it be done for you just as you want." And from that moment, her daughter was healed. The word of the Lord. Okay, so Matthew tells us that Jesus left from there. That's in verse 21. We just read it. The there that Jesus left from can be found in Matthew 14:34. It says there, Matthew says that Jesus was around the area of Gennesaret. Now, while there, he was confronted by some Jerusalem Pharisees and scribes who have beef with Jesus and his disciples. Basically, they were complaining that his disciples didn't follow their traditions by washing their hands before eating. Now, it's customary in most places nowadays to do this because it's dirty and we want to keep people clean, especially post-COVID. But this discussion led Jesus to teach on the importance of understanding that the heart is the seat of sinfulness. He taught them that it wasn't what goes into the body that makes one unclean. No, what comes out of it is what makes one unclean. And then Matthew tells us in verse 21 that Jesus decided to go to the area of Tyre and Sidon. I want to stress that we have no reason at all right here, right now, to know or understand why Jesus does this. Matthew has neglected to let us know on it. One possible reason is because he had just had this confrontation with the Jerusalem Pharisees and the scribes. And that's because in Matthew's gospel, the Pharisaic party are the bad guys. They're the nasty ones. Each gospel has kind of its own bad group. And for Matthew, it's the Pharisees. And therefore, it's possible that Jesus, after this interaction, needed some me time to escape and pull away and to just reload and refresh himself. In Mark's version, 7:24 through 30, he gives us the context that Jesus is alone and he's looking to be unknown. However, I think there's another reason. See, Jesus moves with purpose. Nothing he does ever is haphazard. He's always on a mission. So while in this area, in the region of Tyre and Sidon, a Canaanite woman comes to Jesus for help because her daughter is tormented by a demon. And this is what we can call an encounter story. These are stories where people or groups come to Jesus and they have their faith tested in a way by Jesus himself. One of two things are going to happen. And those are this. One is that they're either going to reject Jesus, they're going to reject his mission and his teaching, and then they're going to come against him. Or they're going to do the complete opposite of that, and they're going to accept him, his message, and they're going to find true freedom. So here we see that Jesus is challenging this woman. Got to keep that in the back of our minds. We're actually in the forefront as we read this. So next, notice that the woman, when she comes to Jesus, she calls him Lord and Son of David. These are titles that show that she's accepting of Jesus and she has knowledge of him as the unique Messiah of Israel. That's an interesting thing to keep in mind too. A Gentile Canaanite woman realizing who Jesus is, while the Pharisaic party and even his disciples at this time don't fully know who he really is. And we get this because Mark tells us in 3:8 that throughout the region of Tyre and Sidon, people were bringing sick and demon-possessed to Jesus because of all the healings he had been doing throughout the regions and area of Galilee. His fame was growing. His popularity was being known. So if she had simply then just called him Lord and left it at that, then it would better have been understood as a translating it maybe as master or sir. But she doesn't do that. She used the unique title attached to Lord of Son of David, a messianic term, a messianic title. The Jesus' response is odd now. She says Lord. She calls him Son of David. She asks for his help. And it seems that he just ignores her. And that's odd. That should strike us when we read this. Because we think Jesus is accepting and all-knowing, right? But here he's not even acknowledging her. And this would have been fine for the disciples until the disciples push him to dismiss her because they're annoyed by her. So then Jesus responds by calling her a dog. Uh-oh, now we're in trouble. We got to clarify some things here. So you might have seen some videos out there by certain progressive Christians. One in particular is by Pastor Brandon Robertson. And this is sad because he has a doctorate in theological studies. And he claims that this passage shows Jesus is a racist, and then that Jesus repented of this, meaning Jesus sinned. This is incorrect, though, and it's mainly because there's a misunderstanding and a misinterpretation of this passage by these progressive Christians. It's a bad exegesis, the word we use that means to draw out of the Greek text. First, the word Jesus uses for dog in English translations that we use has an actually different meaning than the usual word that's used, that is for more of a racial slur. And that's because there are two different words in the Greek that can be used for dog. And one is the one that is racially charged and triggering. And that's because this word defines a dog as a wild dog who scavenges for food, a mangy mutt, a dirty, low-down, despicable, angry, gross dog. And that's the image that Jews used of Gentiles. They were this kind of a dog. This is the word they used. It's not the word that Jesus used, though. The one that he used showed endearment to this woman. See, the Greek word here is one that means a house pet, one that sits on his master's lap and receives pets and loves from his master. That means then that Jesus isn't being a racist. He's showing love and he's showing respect to this woman. And that alone would have shocked his disciples, who being there would have felt more itchy and uncomfortable just because they were there. Have you ever seen the movie The Lord of the Rings? It's a great tie-in. The Fellowship of the Rings has this scene where in it there's several characters, some dwarves, an elf, and several humans. And they're brought in to a conference. And they're trying to decide what to do with this one ring. And it's decided it needs to be taken to Mordor. And a human character named Boromir quips and says, "One does not simply walk into Mordor." There's memes all over for this. It's great. This is the mind frame, when you think about it, that the disciples probably had. One does not simply go into Tyre and Sidon. They were Jews in an unholy and an unclean area because Gentiles saw this area, or not Gentiles, Jews saw this area as unclean, unholy. They might have been worried for thinking that they could be defiled just by standing in this region, crossing the border from Galilee into this area would have made them unholy, unclean. They probably couldn't have gone to the temple or into a synagogue for service. They also, on another end, might have thought that Jesus was there to start his campaign now. A little odd to think that way, but it is possible that they might have thought that he was now ready to rise up and attack Rome. Yet, Jesus, as always, shows his disciples how wrong they truly are. Instead of having their possible animosity against this woman, as they thought he would have shared, and maybe what they thought he might have been trying to do, he actually showed them his love and respect to her. He drew out of her this faith that was found to be so great. And it was because of her faith that her daughter was finally healed from these demons. Healed's not the right word, delivered. She was finally delivered from demons. This is the Jesus that we follow. Jesus is better than we think he is. And that's because we don't always see him or tend to think of him as the way he actually is. When we don't follow our rabbi, then we're without knowledge and direction. You might have thought that it was Jesus being in the wrong here. Now you know otherwise. See, he showed her that he loved her and he gave her respect. And that's because wherever Jesus went and whatever Jesus did and whatever interactions he did it with purpose and with love and with respect. And he found faith in people that we otherwise sometimes miss. So the harvest is ripe and it's here now. So let me ask you these questions, church, for us to think on this week. How will we as a church move forward knowing that Jesus showed love and respect and didn't judge someone that he met, no matter what their background was? How will we do that with others when we meet them? What steps can we take together as a church to show Christ's love to people, Maybe we can start by being more welcoming of those we don't agree with. And that might mean letting the homosexual sit next to you, or the MAGA alt-right leaning bully come in and worship right alongside you. It could be allowing the confused and scared transgendered youth come into the church and actually start learning about Christ, the correct Christ. See, we plant the seed and we let God do the work. God does the changing in their lives, and that's how we need to leave it. Our job is just to plant the seed and allow God to do his work.